Timothy, second chapter, verses 22 through 26. Flee the evil desires of youth and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. Don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments, because you know they produce quarrels. And the Lord's servant must not quarrel. Instead, he must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. Those who oppose him must greatly instruct, in the hope that God will grant them repentance, leading them to the knowledge of the truth, and that they will come to their senses and escape from the trap of the devil, who has taken them captive to do his will. This is the word of God. So it was the 1970s, and this young couple were really excited and looking forward to their wedding. And when the day came for that wedding on that warm August Friday evening, there were storms, heavy storms. They were flooding storms with deafening thunder and actually blinding and alarming lightning. Some of the guests were not even able to get to the wedding on time because of the flooded streets. The wedding cars, all decorated up with Kleenex flowers, which were the rage at that time, became drowned, pale remains falling across the cars. With the flooded streets, the bride was worried that the flooding would prevent her from getting from her friend's home where she dressed to the church in time for the wedding. And that was only a mere mile away. And the church did not have a protective covering to drive up in which she could be safely brought into the church. So instead, she was gently wrapped in garbage bags to protect the wedding dress she had made, and carried up the steps into the church ungraciously by her father. That beautiful wedding gown that she had made, when they noticed, before she went down the aisle, there was a muddy footprint from a child on the tray. The mother-in-law was appalled. The carefully selected music of the organist and the couple was continually interrupted by loud crashes of thunder. The sanctuary lights dimmed at times with the lightning. And there were those who believed that this could be a sign from above about this union. Sure enough, 4 months later, the bride's brother, a groomsman, was killed suddenly by a drunk driver. And as time went on, there were other telling events, like a second child who was unexpectedly born at home in the middle of a blizzard. And then there were job losses, and there were times where it was almost difficult to make it paycheck to paycheck. And then the bride's mother died far too young from kidney disease. And the bride's father died shortly after with diabetes, heart disease, and dementia. One brother ended up in prison and died later of alcoholism. The groom's father developed some serious conditions and ended up crippled. The groom's ex-military brother, strong and bold, developed a neurological condition that left him in a wheelchair. And due to the multiple changes of jobs, the children of this couple were forced to move across multiple states, changing schools, struggling to make new friends, watching their parents attempting to adjust. And some would say this affliction that was brought upon them had an influence because, unfortunately, they only attended state universities. Some would say that this continued on because then the groom was struck with a serious visual problem that resulted in invasive surgeries, lifelong medication. Later, the bride developed breast cancer. And then when the couple took a life-changing trip of a lifetime, the bucket list trip around South America. They found themselves trapped for over 30 days on a ship in the middle of a pandemic. So how do you see this story? Is it the tragic tale of how one event, the lightning, the thunder, the rain, was foretelling of the future? Well, as the groom in this story, I can tell you there's more to the story. And I always remember the words of a lovely elderly Hungarian woman who baked these amazing pastries that I can still taste for the wedding reception, who came up to us, hugged us, and said, "This is God's blessing upon you. For every drop of rain represents a blessing for you." I share this story as a lesson for us to examine regarding the resiliency. Now, not so much the resiliency of me and Sharon, but the resiliency of faith and trusting in God, and how you frame your life and your story with God going forward. We did take that drenching rain and all the laughter that came with it as a blessing, as future blessings that were going to be bestowed upon us. And every day out of our life, we have been assured that God has been there. Now, we may not have always known that. Sometimes it becomes a matter of a retrospective view. Why? Why did we move? Why did this job change happen? Why did that go on for us? But then we think about some of the other things. The new communities where we moved, where our children became involved in amazing youth groups, and they grew in their faith. And where we met other people who became dear friends and challenged us and helped us to grow in our faith. God's plan was at work. And even the same thing that brought us here to grow in this community. So let's go back to the Old Testament for a bit and listen to the words of Jeremiah. Jeremiah was speaking to this group specifically because Nebuchadnezzar had taken part of the Israel nation, primarily those that he felt could service him best, and said, "Guess what? I own you. You're coming with me up here." And they weren't happy. They couldn't see God's plan. They were fighting it. And Jeremiah, as a prophet, not only was there to challenge Nebuchadnezzar, but also to speak to the children of Israel to say, God has a plan for you. Remember that as we continue. When I speak to groups about resiliency, there's two key aspects that I try to help them understand. One is how you frame things, or what we call reframing. And the other is how you develop your story. There's a tendency as human beings to frame things psychologically in a manner that oftentimes becomes very sticky and often very narrow. We're in a difficult time. We can frame this in a very narrow frame. We can focus on the darkness, the loneliness, the challenge, the anxiety. And that gives us a very narrow frame, and what we see in that little frame is just enough. But if we expand that frame out, we can see the presence of God. Think of a picture, one of your favorite pictures from the shore of the sunset. We all love them. The sun going down, the clouds in the background. If we framed that picture only to show the dark clouds, we'd be missing the beauty of the sunset. So the people who saw our wedding day and that storm, which was a once in a 100-year or 500-year storm, as a way of framing our marriage, were absolutely wrong. Because they're focusing only on the negative. They're not expanding the frame to discover more. All those things were true. I did not make any one of them up. But when you expand the frame, you can see more about who that couple became and how God became a part of their story. So if we look at things negatively, like those enslaved people at Babylon, we can't see God. And that's what Jeremiah was trying to get them to understand. You have to see God. So the frame kind of is the setup for the story. Now people say, what do you mean by story as a part of resiliency? We all have a story. How we tell a story, I told that story in one way. People have asked us about our cruise that ended up being 32, 33 days. And I tell that story as a wonderful adventure. And people look at me. They can't understand, how is that? But it was a wonderful adventure. And we had toilet paper, and we didn't have to fight for it. The frame sets the stories. So, how do you write your story? There's lots of influences in your story, and I like to say that your story is co-authored with God. Now, I have written books before, and I've worked with co-authors, and it is a challenge. Each party has their own opinions, where they want to go, what they want to do, and they have editorial differences. And I can say that in this story that I have with God, we have editorial differences. And at times, I may step back and say, I don't want to write this story with you anymore. I've got friends, and I've got colleagues, and I've got other people, and they can help me with this. But then I realize that the story is incomplete. To be resilient in faith, to be resilient as an individual, you have to realize that together with God, you are creating a story chapter by chapter. And the story is one that is continually being written together. So the question is, what are we bringing to our story? How have we framed it? What are the assumptions that we have with this? Is it the assumption that every chapter is going to be wonderful and glorious? I doubt if you've ever read a story like that in your life. Stories are about development of the main characters, development of events. And there are dark events that lead to a new development for the characters that go on. It's the same in our story with God. Your story is supported by your beliefs. As Christians, we publicly stand up and we profess ourselves as the followers of Jesus Christ. And as part of the Grove community, we stand up and we agree that our vision is the same as the vision of this community, which is we are living for Jesus and changing lives. How is your story being written to do that? It's much more about the components of your story that help reflect your profession of faith. Now, none of this is easy, guaranteed, because we're constantly struggling against a desire to frame things narrowly with a dark and ugly frame. Think about your favorite picture in your home. And once the store is open and you go out to a framing shop and you say, I want the darkest, ugliest frame for this beautiful picture. Will the people see the beautiful picture, or will they only see the ugly frame? Same with our story. Are they only going to hear the negatives of our story, or are you going to expand for them and say, and this is where the glory of God became a part of our life? Timothy was talking to a struggling community. This is Pentecost, the anniversary of the church. And that community was struggling in different forms throughout, in terms of some were feeling isolated. They couldn't be public with their faith for fear of torture or death. There was dissent within them. They had spent too much time together, and they were trying to work things out. And Timothy was taking them back to treat each other with love and dignity and honesty. The same story rings true for us today. We are developing a story. In the midst of this pandemic, like any event that we've all experienced, a story will emerge up, our story. There will be a collective story, but there will be an individual story. And that individual story will reflect your ability to be resilient in your faith, in your own capabilities. Our story is a community on how we help others. Our story is a nation on how we can overcome the anger and the frustration and the fear and come together. And we're all writing that. And God is very much involved. So let me go back to the beginning of the story, because I don't want you all to feel that it was all bad. In the 46 years that Sharon and I have been married, it truly has been a blessing from God. We have 2 wonderfully successful children that we're very proud of. We've experienced more blessings than we ever could have imagined back in 1973. And those parties actually were correct when they said the raindrops were representative. They were representative of absolutely amazing blessings in our life. So I challenge you today to frame your life and your story with the understanding of Jeremiah and the wisdom been provided by Timothy. Be assured that God does have a plan, and frame and build that story together with God, avoiding evil, written honestly, full of love and compassion for yourself